Nice. Yeah, let's go.
So you're going to do an introduction, Dean, or am I just going into it?
Oh, my apologies. Yeah, sorry, I haven't got the intro on me this time. Yeah, to talk you up a little, but
That's all right. You don't have to. You just tell me when you want to get started, and I'll be fine. Is that too
okay.
bright, that screen?
It's the light's interesting. It's different. It makes it interesting. So just leave it. It's all good. The pictures in the back are awesome. Um,
Okay, cool.
but anyways, okay, we're live now. Good to go.
There you go.
I'll
You
leave
can
it
go
to you.
better view. All right. Okay. All right. So thanks, Dean, for organising this phenomenal conference. Yeah, this is the first one, and I'm very proud to be part of it. And good on you for getting it up and going. It's one of the toughest things on earth to do, pulling off a gig like this. So without further ado, I'd say Winyu Kalgol Buran Maranya. This is just a warm welcome to this session on decolonizing the economy. Now, one of the important aspects of decolonizing the economy is, I guess, knowing how we ended up in this mess, how we ended up with a government that thinks it owns the land, and what the truth is, and getting down to the tin tacks of the truth. Some of you may realize that I asserted allodial title and created the international legal precedent on allodial title some years ago, and I think we'll just share screen there now. I think I can do this and show you how that all happened. This is the Commonwealth Law Bulletin, and this is the preeminent law journal. Or it's not a journal, it's a bulletin, and there's a distinct difference between a journal and a bulletin. A bulletin is, in fact, an instruction, and you've all heard of papal bulls. You know, the Crown or the Vatican will issue a papal bull. A papal bull is an instruction to the clergy around the world in the Catholic Church on new findings. And in this instance, the colonial land title in Australia, a metalegal critical inquiry paper, was published in the Commonwealth Law Bulletin, which is an instruction from the Crown directly on new law. And this is an instruction to the judiciary around the 37 countries that Britain has colonised. And seeing this paper published, and this paper is about the case that I put forward in the ACT Supreme Court, asserting allodial title and being awarded an interlocutory injunction. You'll see here in the introduction to the paper that in the very first sentence, it refers to me by name and case. So in 2016, in Mortimer versus Oswald Limited, trading as Kalula Farm in liquidation, which was heard in the Supreme Court of the Australian Capital Territory, Acting Chief Justice Ref Shorgi granted to Mortimer an interlocutory injunction preventing the transfer of a plot of Torrens title land in the Australian Capital Territory based on the basis of Mortimer's Aboriginal claim to prior allodial title over it. Now, bear in mind, please, that this paper is an official publication from the Crown to the judiciary around the world. So every judge around the world is actually expected to read this paper and to know about it. Very few know about it in this country, that's for sure. And in fact, if you go up to any lawyer and ask any lawyer you know, what can you tell me about allodial title? It's highly likely that they'll say never heard of it, because they just don't get taught allodial law in law schools in Australia, and it's a very deliberate move on behalf of the government not to teach lawyers and emerging lawyers about this particular title. Allodial title is the title of all First People globally. And that's the significance of this particular case is this is the international legal precedent on allodial title, and which I did in 2016, and this was published in 2019. And in 2019, having this publication, I was then invited by the Horasis Forum of World Leaders and conferred full membership of their group, which is a group that includes the heads of state of all countries and the owners of the Fortune 500 companies. So it's a very big privilege to be part of that. They meet in Portugal on an annual basis. And given my appointment was 2019, the next meeting was on March 30th in 2020. And of course, COVID hit, and there hasn't been a meeting since. But the one big question that they had for me as a new member in addressing their forum was, what are the international implications on the allodial title legal precedent? And so that's the area that I am going to address at the next meeting. The next Forum of World Leaders is actually solely focused on allodial title, and I'm the keynote speaker. So it's a good position to be coming from. What's the importance of all of this to us? Simply this: as a Ngambri elder, Canberra is named after my family, and my bloodline connection here is 9 generations in a consecutive line of women. So I have an indisputable mitochondrial connection to country that nobody can disprove. And our entitlement, because of being First People and because of being allodial title holders, the entitlement is to everything below the ground to the core of the earth, and everything above the earth to the stars over our lands. Now, this is really, really critical that you understand that that is your entitlement over the land that you have bloodline connection to. So very important that you can trace your connection and irrefutably prove that connection to land and to country. And there are ways and means of doing that, obviously through DNA tracing and so on. But it's a really important thing for you to be able to do that. There are many people who have been transmigrated into my country, and transmigration was government policy of the 19th and 20th century. They pick up people from one country, dump them in another person's country, and expect them to live, knowing full well of the confusion it would make. So sometimes for us, it takes a little bit of tracing to work out who we are and what our bloodline connection is. So you can see here that the author is saying it was clear by his admission of the fact to the judge that the Australian barrister opposing the action did not understand the relevant law. Thus, the objective of this research is to analyse critically the English colonial understanding of the bundle of rights comprising allodial title by relevant references to the machinations of the North American post-revolution states in their various attempts to rid themselves of feudal tenure and successfully declare their lands allodial. Now, they haven't done that in the United States. And incidentally, this legal precedent has been used in America. I passed this on through Maggie Dodd White Eagle to her brother, Senator Jonathan Windy Boy, who is the only Native American senator and the advisor to President Biden on Native American issues. And they used this allodial title legal precedent to stop these pipelines going through Native American reservations. So it's been used internationally, it frequently is used internationally, and the allodial title law is taught in every other country in the world except for Australia. Even in New Zealand, they teach allodial title in law school. So that's just sort of one aspect of it. Allodial title is not only just your entitlement, it's an ancient law. The word allodial comes from an ancient German word, allud. This was spoken by the first people of Germany, this word allud. It predates ancient Greek, the Koine Greek language. It predates Latin by a long shot. And it's the root word for allodial, allud, A-L-U-D. And allud means no lord. So in the same way as if somebody is amoral, they have no morals. If somebody has allodial, they have no lord over their title. They are the ultimate title holder to their land, and nobody can take that away from them. So how did we get in this predicament here in this country? How is it that, we traded with the world, and that's been proven by many academics that we had successful trading with Asia. I don't know if you realize, but the origins of rice with the Cape York people, the Wick people in Cape York. And rice has since been traded all over the world, and particularly in Asia. But the genetic origins of rice are in Cape York. It's like the genetic origins of coffee are in Ethiopia, and the genetic origins of rubber are in Brazil. And these facts have been borne out by the same academics who proved that genetic origins of rice are in Cape York with the Wick people. So we have a really proud history of trade, but we also have a very proud history of peace in this land. We've never had war declared on our people. We've never declared war on other people. Our existence here has been a very peaceful existence, and our trading relationships with Indonesia, with Sri Lanka, with New Guinea, with Papua, with China, with the Pacific Islands, it's always been peaceful. Even New Zealand, peaceful. So why and how did that all become disturbed? And obviously the answer to that is colonization, but colonization has its roots too. And we know colonization's a crime against humanity declared by the United Nations as such. And but to go back to how it all happened, I lecture in the field of social work, First People and Human Services in the field of social work for the Australian College of Applied Professionals, which is part of the Navitas group. And it's a big responsibility for social workers to go out there with knowledge of First People and an understanding of First People. And so what led to that, I guess, is the fact that I have a double degree in what you would describe as applied psychology. As a social scientist, my degrees are in counseling and coaching. So to look at, and we're just going to this shared screen again and have a look at some of these documents that we have here to be able to refer to, and which I think are pretty vital to this conversation. And there it is. It's the one I'm looking for. Okay. So how did Australia end up in the state that it is right now? And we have a very interesting genealogy to look at here that I'll bring up onto the screen now, if this can happen. Excuse me a second. Okay, we'll just share screen. Okay. Okay. Here we see Pope Alexander II from 1061 to 1073. This man was he mentored a young fellow named Guillaume, who was the illegitimate son of the King of France, the Duke of Normandy. And he mentored this man to go and fight, this young man. It didn't matter if he went and fought and he lost because he was illegitimate. He had no entitlement. He was born without entitlement because he was born out of wedlock to a mistress of the Duke of Normandy. And so if they sent him to a war and he lost the war, that was fine. If he was killed, didn't matter. He was sacrificial. That's the way it was viewed. And he was sent off to war. And he fought a battle in England. And he defeated the English King Harold at the Battle of Hastings in 1066. And then on Christmas Day in 1066, Alexander II proclaimed Guillaume to be King William I, the illegitimate son of the Duke of Normandy. And it boggles my mind to think that an Italian can appoint a Frenchman to be the King of England. I don't know how that works. I find it very amusing. Because he had no title to land in England. And this is a really big problem because he ran out of money. He had no entitlement to take the money out of the land. He had nothing. And so you can see the workings of the Vatican on this. And it's really very interesting where he came up with an idea because he couldn't pay his military. He couldn't pay his army at all. He had nothing. And so to do that, he ended up doing a survey, commissioned a survey of the villages and the boroughs of England and France, England and Wales, parts of Wales. And he worked out how much money he could drag out of them in terms of taxes. And then very cleverly, because it was in their interest, he sent his military in to collect the taxes. It was either pay up or you're dead. And so that's how things sort of started. And then, of course, William had a son, and that was King William II. That's this fella here, and who took the throne from him. And of course, because he had no title to land, he had no allodium, he had no allodial title. He followed through in his father's footsteps, and they collected the taxes. And of course, this is how the Robin Hood thing came about, taking from the rich to give to the poor, and the Sheriff of Nottingham and all of that, the baggage that goes along with it. And so we see, major problems happening here. And King William II was succeeded by his younger brother who became King Henry. And then in 1095, based on this model that came about as a result of Pope Urban II's instruction to Guillaume, Pope Alexander II came Pope Urban II. Pope Urban II came up with the Papal Bull Terra Nullius. And the Papal Bull Terra Nullius instructed the kings of Europe to send people out to explore the New World. And when they find countries that are occupied by people who are not Catholic, then those people were declared infidels. They were subhuman. And as a result of being not human, their lands are terra nullius, a land without people. And this is the man who came up with the Papal Bull Terra Nullius. That is a pretty clear instruction to the way the world viewed every other country. In the 1100s, of course, came King Henry I, a bloodline connection there between he and the previous king. You can see there, he was his brother of King William II. And you can see that bloodline going through. And then, of course, came King Stephen, who was King Henry's nephew. Again, another bloodline connection, and taking us through to the mid 1100s with King Stephen. Now, King Stephen likewise produced King Henry II. So you can see here we have a line of bloodline of kings, and this King Henry II gave birth to, his wife did, Richard I. So there again we have this bloodline connection, and there's Richard I. Now Richard I handed on to his brother William. So sorry, King John. And so then from John, we end up with Henry III, and then Henry III, we end up with Edward I. Right? This just goes on and on and on for 40 generations. So I won't bore you with the 40 generations, but you do need to understand this and the importance of this bloodline of the British royal family. There we are in the 13th and 14th centuries with King Edward I, and again handing to his son. So I went back 1,000 years to have a look at what happened. Why is it these people are just so violent? Why do they think they can walk into somebody else's land and just kill people en masse, as they did on this land? And they did this in 37 countries around the world. It's quite remarkable that they would even get away with this. It's just quite weird. And there's Edward II handing on to Edward III. And there's Edward III handing on to his grandson, King Richard. Again, bloodline connection. And then Richard III to King Henry IV. King Henry IV to King Henry V. So on and so forth. Henry V handing on to Henry VI, and Henry VI to Edward IV. And again, handing to his nephew, another bloodline connection. And this is a very pure bloodline connection. Then, of course, we had Edward IV. He was only there for a short time. He had 2 spells at being king. There's a lot of argument in the royal family, but the bloodline remained. And whilst Edward handed over, or was actually killed, he was executed, Edward V, and his place was taken by Richard III. Again, a bloodline connection, and he actually executed his predecessor, and succeeded from Henry VII. And they're both descended from Edward III. So it's again bloodline connection without going into the boring details of all of this. And then we ended up with Henry VII, of course, handing to his son Henry VIII. And we're getting closer and closer to our time. This is in the 16th century. There's Henry VIII hanging on there with his son, King Edward VI. And there's Edward VI. He had a fairly short reign, handed on to his half-sister, Queen Mary I. So bloodline for bloodline for bloodline, and there's Queen Mary I in the 16th century. And then she hands on to her sister, Elizabeth I. It's very important to note the bloodline, because you'll see what happens here. And there we have Elizabeth I handing on to her cousin King James, because she was the Virgin Queen, didn't have any offspring. So her cousin King James took over. And there's King James, a very religious person who came up with the King James Bible. And his son succeeded him, King Charles, Charles I, and then succeeded by Charles II. Charles II succeeded by James II. He was King James II of England, but King James VII of Scotland. and so on and so forth. Here we go. Now, Queen Anne succeeded his heir, and then we have Queen Anne for a relatively short time, 1702 to 1714, and she was succeeded by King George I. And then here we're getting very, very close to our time. And King George I's time there, 1714, 1727, very close, just 50 years before Cook, came King George II. And there he is there. King George II was with us until 1760. So Cook would have been just about on his way to Australia by that point in time. So King George III took over from King George II, who was the one who saw Banks and Cook off on their way to this land. And the interesting thing about that is that Cook, under his instruction, declared our land terra nullius, in the full knowledge that in the 15th century, the Catholic Church had annulled the papal bull terra nullius, the doctrine of discovery. They completely removed it and declared it null and void. It was no longer. But yet they still carried on with this. And so we have what I described because of its origins in the Vatican. We have a lasagna of lies taking place here. Layer after layer after layer of lies, and covering up for lies. And King George III was very much a part of that, because they knew full well that the doctrine of discovery had been removed. And ironically, in the same period that was removed, in the 1500s, was a fellow named Etienne de la Boétie, who wrote a publication called The Politics of Obedience. And the Politics of Obedience was the blueprint for colonization. The blueprint for colonization, written by a French Catholic. And so that was the blueprint used by King George III to colonize Australia and other lands, India, obviously, and many. This is the biggest period of colonization in this period of King George III. It was King George III who invented that word Aboriginal, meaning non-original. So that's the fellow who developed it, and it's like if you have well, I guess the word absence, without sense. Abnormal, not normal. And so he just applied the rules of Latin to that term, aboriginal, and meaning non-original. So having done that, he handed over to King George the Fourth. And here we're well and truly into our period here. King George IV was succeeded by Queen Victoria. There she is. And then Queen Victoria handed over to Edward VII. And Edward VII saw King George V. And King George V to King Edward VIII, who abdicated and handed over to his brother King George VI. There we are, the Queen's father. And then he, of course, handed over to Queen Elizabeth, who we know today. And so too continues the lies. So we have what, as I say, I describe as a lasagna of lies, going back to that period of Pope Urban II in the middle of the 11th century. And here we are now in the 21st century. It's almost 1,000 years of lie upon lie upon lie upon lie to and all of the things that they've done, and using the instructions from the popes. And it's under, you can, with this you can sort of see what the situation is. But I guess the underlying thing, the thing that is the fabric of all of this, is that 1066 Battle of Hastings, and the fact that that King William I didn't have allodial title to the land, and he had to use brute force in order to extract the taxes from the people. And that policy has been well and truly embraced. And yet they still continue to have no title to the land. The fact that Queen Elizabeth is a descendant, a bloodline descendant, as you can see from what I've been able to show you here. I just cobbled this together quickly last night. But you can see that because he didn't have any title to the land, he was completely unentitled because of his illegitimacy. Queen Elizabeth has no title either. You see, with allodial title, you have to provide proof of exchange for that title to pass from one entity to another entity. There must be something like a bill of sale, for example, if you want to put it into modern vernacular. There must be evidence of having acquired the land. Well, the British Crown has no evidence of having acquired the land in England, let alone in any of the 37 countries that they've colonized. They have no beneficial title. Allodial title is beneficial title. You can benefit from the land. And Queen Elizabeth is certainly benefiting from the land through companies like BHP and Rio Tinto. And yes, your old mate Twiggy Forrest and Fortescue, I'm sure she has a few shares in there. Certainly in Serco, the company that runs our prison system in Australia, that's wholly and solely owned by the British royal family. And then, of course, you have other organizations. I'll just stop the share there for a moment and show you this little gem, which is no surprise to anybody, but you'll recognize his face the minute you see it. And that's, where are we? Here we go, we get back into share screen. Okay, there he is. The Australian Mint. And there's Prince Philip, of course, the Queen's husband, celebrating the Australian Mint. It's a very famous photograph taken in 1965, because the royal family takes 5% of everything that goes through the Australian Mint, everything. And the Australian Mint doesn't just produce money for Australia, it produces money for a great many other countries, Pacific Island nations in particular. And they take 5% off the top of everything produced in the Australian Mint. And so this is part of their colonization. And it's pretty evil, if you ask me, when they have no beneficial title to our land. And that's their big problem. So we have a situation where colonizing is actually a crime against humanity, and it embraces the notion of genocide. And for those of you not familiar with the Genocide Convention, we'll have a quick look at that, because it undermines, or it underpins colonization. And this is where we're coming to the understanding of why these people are so violent and particularly I guess, nasty to First People. And here we go. That's the document I'm looking for. So, can you describe what the term decolonizing the economy means to you? What are the questions that in putting this together? And here in ancient notion makes sense of right and wrong, and it's so true. And so through the decolonizing requires an understanding of the notions and right relation to colonization as incorporating genocide, which the British Empire, as I said, inflicted on 37 nations. 1947 convention in 1947, and then ratified by it. Really, Australia has accepted, ignores it. Is in Article 2 of the element deliberately inflicting on a group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction. So deliberately inflicting, the word is the group, conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. Now, the migration, for example, it's life. So too is killing people. And we see enormous evidence of annotated Australian Constitution. Now, this Constitution is a piece of Britain. Nobody in Australia actually any say in the Constitution.